some painful state. This is called despair. And what, friends, is not to obtain what one wants is suffering. To being subject to birth, there comes the wish, oh, that we were not subject to birth, that birth would not come to us. But this is not to be obtained by wishing, and not to obtain what one wants is suffering. To being subject to aging, subject to sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair, there comes the wish, oh, that we were not subject to this aging, sickness, dying, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. But this is not to be obtained by wishing, and not to obtain what one wants is suffering. And what, friends, are the 5 aggregates of attachment that in short are suffering? They are the material form aggregate, or the body aggregate of attachment, the feeling aggregate of attachment, perception aggregate of attachment, volition aggregate of attachment, consciousness aggregate of attachment. These are the 5 aggregates of attachment that in short are suffering. This is called the noble truth of suffering. Stop here for a moment. So here it's quite clear what it means by pain. Pain is bodily pain. Grief is mental pain. Despair, not to get what you want. Here the Buddha specifically talks about birth, not to get, not to be reborn, or and not to be sick, not to age and all that. But anything in the world that we want and we cannot get is also suffering. And then in brief, or in short, the Buddha says that the 5 aggregates of attachment are suffering. These 5 aggregates are body, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness. The last 4, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness, can be said to be mind. So the 5 aggregates are body and mind. And these 5 aggregates we always identify with ourselves. For most people, we identify the body and the mind as I or mine, or I am in these 5 aggregates, or the 5 aggregates are inside me. So because we consider these 5 aggregates to be I and mine, we attach to it. We attach to it, and when it changes, because all things in the world are impermanent, then we are not. We suffer when it changes, because we don't want the 5 aggregates to change. We don't want the 5 aggregates to become sick, to become old and to die. And what, friends, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is craving which brings renewal of being. It's accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, and craving for non-being. This is called the noble truth of the origin of suffering. And what, friends, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving. This is called the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Stop here a moment. So here the Buddha says the origin of suffering is craving, which brings renewal of being. And this craving, there are 3 types of craving. Craving for sensual pleasures, that means craving for sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, and it can also include thoughts. So this is worldly pleasure. Most people, because we don't know of any pleasure higher than this pleasure, so worldly people will indulge in sensual pleasure. And they feel they must indulge in sensual pleasure because the world is suffering. Or even if they don't indulge in sensual pleasure, life is so boring. They want excitement, they want happiness, they want enjoyment. So this enjoyment comes from enjoying beautiful sights, sounds, smells, taste and touch, especially the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. And then the second type of craving is craving for being. That means craving for existence. We want We want to continue to be to be alive. So when most people die, the craving to live is so strong, it brings them to rebirth again. And then craving for non-being, there are two types. One is worldly craving for non-being. That means somebody is overwhelmed by suffering. For example, a person's financial empire collapses due to economic recession. Sometimes you see in the newspaper, I remember many years ago, there's one Japanese man clutching all his share certificates. He jumped down from a very high building and died. Because his share certificates became worthless. So this is craving for non-being. You want to stop existing because life is so much suffering for you. You can't bear it. This happens very often. I see in the papers some people commit suicide for various reasons. Young man might be broken-hearted because got jilted and then commit suicide, and similarly for a young girl, etc. And then the other type of craving for non-being is a person on the holy path. A person on the holy path, if the desire to become liberated from existence is too strong, then he goes into all kinds of unbeneficial ascetic practices. Like the Buddha, for many years, 6 years, he went through all the various ascetic practices because the desire to be liberated was so strong that he tried everything. But the Buddha says you cannot be liberated that way, because when you crave for liberation, the mind is very agitated, and the agitated mind cannot enter Nibbana. Nibbana is a cool state. The mind got to be completely cool and desireless. You don't want anything, then only you can be liberated. So these are the three cravings. And the cessation of suffering is obtained by letting go of that craving, all the three types of craving. And what, friends, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering? It is just this noble eightfold path, that is, right view, right thoughts, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right recollection, and right concentration. And what, friends, is right view? Knowledge of suffering, knowledge of the origin of suffering, knowledge of the cessation of suffering, and knowledge of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called right view. And what, friends, is right thought? Thought of renunciation, thought of non-ill will, and thought of non-cruelty. This is called right thought. And what, friends, is right speech? Abstaining from false speech, abstaining from malicious speech, abstaining from harsh speech, abstaining from idle chatter. This is called right speech. And what, friends, is right action? Abstaining from killing living beings, from taking what is not given, from misconduct in sensual pleasures. This is called right action. And what, friends, is right livelihood? Here a noble disciple, having abandoned wrong livelihood, earns his living by right livelihood. This is called right livelihood. Stop here for a moment. So here the Noble Eightfold Path consists of 8 factors. The first and most important one is right view. We read an earlier sutta that to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, you must attain right view first. If you don't attain right view, you have not entered the Noble Eightfold Path. So the first factor to be practiced is the right view. You need to obtain right view. And right view here is defined as knowledge of the 4 noble truths concerning suffering. And then right thoughts is the opposite of wrong thoughts. So the opposite of wrong thoughts is renunciation, non-ill will, and non-cruelty. Right speech, there are 4 factors in right speech. Lying, abstaining from lying, abstaining from carrying tales. If you hear A talk about B, you should not report to B that A said such and such bad things about him.